Welcome to Sleepy Philosophy. It's wonderful to have you here tonight. Before we begin our gentle journey into the ancient wisdom of the Stoics, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Perhaps you're nestled in a cozy bedroom in London as the rain taps softly against your window, or maybe you're lying on a comfortable couch in Denver, watching the last light fade behind the mountains. Wherever you find yourself tonight, I hope you're settled in comfortably, ready to let these timeless ideas wash over you like a warm tide. If you enjoy these peaceful explorations into philosophy and would like more content like this, a gentle like and subscribe would mean the world to this sleepy little channel. And to those of you who are already part of our community, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is what makes these quiet conversations possible. Now, I'll try not to make tonight's topic so fascinating that it keeps you wide awake, but if it does, at least you'll have learned some powerful techniques for building mental resilience that have been tested across 2 millennia. A small price to pay for a restless night, wouldn't you say? So let's begin, shall we? What does it mean to have an unbreakable mind? And how can ancient wisdom from Rome and Greece help us navigate the storms of modern life? Picture this for a moment. You're standing in the ruins of the Roman Forum on a quiet morning. The stones beneath your feet once echoed with the footsteps of emperors and slaves, senators and merchants. Among them walked men who faced plagues, wars, exile, and death with a composure that seems almost superhuman to us today. These weren't men without feelings or fears. They were human beings who had discovered something profound about the nature of suffering and peace. They had learned to build minds that could bend without breaking, hearts that could feel deeply without being destroyed, and spirits that could find calm in any storm. They called their philosophy Stoicism, though the name hardly captures the depth and practical power of their insights. Tonight, we're going to explore how these ancient techniques can help you develop what I like to call an unbreakable mind. Not unfeeling or rigid, but flexible and resilient. A mind that can weather life's inevitable challenges with grace, find meaning in difficulty, and maintain inner peace even when the world around you feels chaotic. The word unbreakable might sound dramatic, but I don't mean it in the superhero sense. I mean it in the way that water is unbreakable. Water doesn't resist the obstacles it encounters. It flows around them, over them, through them. It adapts to any container, yet never loses its essential nature. It can be frozen into ice or heated into steam, but it remains fundamentally water. This is the kind of strength we're exploring tonight, fluid and adaptable, yet enduring. The Stoics understood something crucial about human nature that we often forget in our modern rush toward comfort and convenience. They recognized that suffering isn't a bug in the human experience, it's a feature, not something to be avoided at all costs, but something to be understood, accepted, and even transformed into wisdom. But here's what makes their approach so different from mere resignation or passive acceptance. The Stoics weren't teaching people to become emotional robots or to suppress their feelings. They were teaching something far more sophisticated, a way of relating to life's challenges that preserves your inner freedom regardless of external circumstances. Think about the last time something really upset you. Maybe it was a difficult conversation with a family member, unexpected news at work, or simply getting caught in traffic when you were already running late. In that moment, you probably felt like your peace of mind was completely at the mercy of these external events. The Stoics would gently suggest that this feeling, while perfectly natural, is based on a fundamental misunderstanding about where your peace actually comes from. They discovered that we have far more control over our inner state than we typically realize, and simultaneously, far less control over external events than we usually assume. This insight forms the foundation of what we might call Stoic resilience. Journey toward an unbreakable mind begins. And it's where the first technique we'll explore tonight is something the Stoics called the discipline of desire. Though that phrase might sound more restrictive than it actually is. It's really about learning to want what happens rather than demanding that what we want must happen. This isn't about becoming passive or giving up on your dreams and goals. It's about developing a different relationship with outcomes, one that preserves your peace regardless of results. Imagine you're holding pet hands. You can appreciate a bird in your queue, its beauty, feel grateful for this moment of connection, and then gently open your hands to let it fly. The bird might stay a moment longer, or it might immediately take flight. Either way, your joy doesn't depend on controlling its choice. You've learned to find satisfaction in the experience itself, not in forcing a particular outcome. This is what the Stoics meant when they talked about focusing on what's up to us versus what's not up to us. Your effort is up to you. Your intentions, your preparation, your response to events, these are all within your sphere of influence. But the results, other people's reactions, the timing of outcomes, these exist largely outside your control. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who practiced these principles while managing an empire and leading armies, wrote in his private journal about this very idea. He reminded himself that he could control his judgments about events, but not the events themselves. He could choose his response to challenges, but not whether those challenges would arise. This might sound simple, but applying it consistently requires what we might call philosophical muscles that most of us haven't developed. We've been conditioned to believe that our happiness depends on specific outcomes, that our worth is measured by external achievements, and that we should be able to control far more than we actually can. The second technique involves what the Stoics called negative visualization, though again, the name might be misleading. This isn't about pessimism or dwelling on worst-case scenarios. It's a gentle practice of imagining loss in order to cultivate gratitude for what you currently have and to prepare your mind for the inevitable changes that life brings. Try this now if you're comfortable doing so. Think about someone you care deeply about. Now, very gently, imagine a day when they won't be part of your daily life anymore. This might happen through natural changes, like children growing up and moving away, or friends relocating to different cities. Or it might happen through the natural cycle of life and death that touches everyone eventually. The point isn't to become morbid or anxious about these possibilities. The point is to let this awareness deepen your appreciation for the present moment. When you truly understand that everything you love is temporary, you begin to see each interaction, each shared meal, each quiet evening together as the gift it actually is. The Stoics practiced this not to become detached from life, but to become more fully present to it. They understood that our tendency to take good things for granted diminishes our capacity for joy and makes us more vulnerable to suffering when changes inevitably occur. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself each morning that he might encounter difficult people during the day, not because he was pessimistic, but because this mental preparation allowed him to respond with patience and wisdom rather than reactive frustration. He was building what we might call emotional shock absorbers, creating space between events and his reactions to them. The third technique we'll explore tonight is the practice of reframing, which the Stoics called examining our impressions. Every event that occurs in your life is fundamentally neutral until your mind interprets it and assigns it meaning. The same rainstorm that ruins one person's picnic provides much needed water for another person's garden. This isn't about positive thinking in the shallow sense of pretending everything is wonderful when it clearly isn't. It's about recognizing that you have more choice in how you interpret events than you might realize. And this choice, exercised wisely, can be the difference between resilience and despair. Consider someone who loses their job unexpectedly. The initial shock and concern are natural and appropriate responses, but how they frame this event going forward will largely determine whether it becomes a source of ongoing suffering or an opportunity for growth and new directions. A Stoic approach might involve asking questions like, what can this situation teach me? How might this challenge help me develop qualities like patience, creativity, or humility? What opportunities might this open up that I couldn't see before? Not because unemployment is inherently good, but because these questions direct your mental energy toward possibilities rather than fixating on problems. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who spent years as a slave before gaining his freedom and becoming a teacher, understood this principle deeply. He taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about events. Change your judgments, he suggested, and you change your experience of life. This might sound like philosophical wordplay, but modern psychology has validated this insight through decades of research. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most effective treatments for depression and anxiety, is built on the Stoic understanding that our thoughts about events often cause more suffering than the events themselves. The fourth technique involves what the Stoics called the discipline of action, which is about acting with virtue regardless of outcomes. This means doing what you believe is right, not because it guarantees success, but because it aligns with your deepest values and contributes to the common good. In our results-oriented culture, this can feel counterintuitive. We're taught to measure our actions primarily by their outcomes. But the Stoics understood that this approach makes your peace of mind hostage to forces beyond your control. Instead, they suggested measuring your actions by their wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline. Think about a time when you did the right thing even though it was difficult or unpopular. Maybe you spoke up for someone being treated unfairly, or you kept a promise even when it became inconvenient. In that moment, regardless of how others responded, you probably felt a deep sense of alignment between your actions and your values. This is what the Stoics meant by virtue as its own reward. Seneca, the Roman statesman and philosopher, wrote extensively about this principle. He suggested that when you act with virtue, you've already succeeded in the most important sense, regardless of external results. The outcome is a bonus, not the source of your satisfaction. This approach to action creates what we might call anti-fragile resilience. Instead of just bouncing back from difficulties, you actually grow stronger through them. Each challenge becomes an opportunity to practice virtue, to strengthen your character, and to deepen your understanding of what really matters. The fifth technique we'll explore is the practice of memento mori, or remembering death. This might sound morbid, but the Stoics viewed death awareness as one of the most powerful tools for living fully. When you truly accept the temporary nature of your existence, priorities become clearer, petty concerns fade away, and you're more likely to act with courage and authenticity. Marcus Aurelius regularly reminded himself that his time was limited, not to become depressed, but to focus his energy on what truly mattered. He wrote about how thinking about death helped him appreciate simple pleasures, like the warmth of sunlight or the company of friends. This awareness also cultivates humility. When you remember that you're part of something much larger and more enduring than your individual life, it becomes easier to let go of ego-driven concerns and to act with wisdom and compassion. As we continue our exploration of these ancient techniques for building mental resilience, remember that the goal isn't to become invulnerable to life's challenges. The goal is to develop a different relationship with those challenges, one that preserves your inner freedom and allows you to respond with wisdom rather than merely react with emotion. The Stoics understood that an unbreakable mind isn't one that never bends or feels pain. It's one that can experience the full spectrum of human emotion while maintaining its essential stability and capacity for wise action. Like a tree that bends in the storm but doesn't lose its roots, or like water that adapts to any container while never losing its fundamental nature. Tonight, we've begun to explore how these time-tested techniques can help you develop this kind of resilience. But this is just the beginning of our journey together into the profound wisdom of the Stoic tradition. The sixth technique the Stoics developed is perhaps one of their most practical and immediately applicable, what they called the discipline of assent. This is of the art you sing between stimulus and response, creating a sacred space where wisdom can flourish instead of letting reflexive reactions control your behavior. Picture your mind as a gatekeeper at the entrance to a peaceful garden. Throughout the day, various thoughts, emotions, and impulses knock at the gate, each claiming urgency and demanding immediate entry. The untrained mind throws the gate wide open to everything, letting anger march in alongside worry, letting fear set up camp next to resentment. But the Stoic mind has learned to examine each visitor carefully before deciding whether to grant admission. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. The Stoics understood that emotions are natural human responses, like weather patterns in the sky of consciousness. But just as you wouldn't let a storm dictate your entire day's activities, you don't have to let every emotional impulse determine your actions. Epictetus taught his students a simple but powerful exercise. When you feel a strong emotion arising, instead of immediately acting on it, pause and ask yourself 3 questions. First, is this emotion based on something within my control or something outside my control? Second, what would acting on this emotion accomplish? And is that aligned with my deeper values? Third, how will I view this situation a year from now? And what response would my wisest self choose? These questions aren't meant to eliminate emotion, but to create space for wisdom to inform your response. It's the difference between being driven by your feelings and being guided by them. You can acknowledge anger without lashing out, recognize fear without being paralyzed, and feel sadness without drowning in despair. Marcus Aurelius practiced this discipline even in the most challenging circumstances. Leading military campaigns, managing political crises, dealing with personal losses, he developed the habit of stepping back from his initial reactions and asking what response would serve the greater good. His private writings reveal a man who felt deeply but chose his actions carefully. The 7th technique involves what we might call philosophical journaling, though the Stoics would have simply called it self-examination. Each evening, they would review the day's events not to judge themselves harshly, but to learn from their experiences and prepare for continued growth. Seneca wrote letters to his friend Lucilius that were essentially philosophical journals shared between kindred spirits. In these letters, he examined his own reactions to events, celebrated moments when he acted with virtue, and honestly acknowledged times when he fell short of his ideals. But this self-reflection was always gentle and constructive, aimed at understanding rather than self-condemnation. You might try this practice yourself. Before sleep, spend a few quiet minutes reviewing your day. What moments challenged your peace of mind? How did you respond to difficulties? When did you act from wisdom? And when did you react from emotion? What can these experiences teach you about yourself and about life? The beauty of this practice is that it transforms even difficult experiences into valuable learning opportunities. Every mistake becomes a chance to understand yourself better. Every challenge becomes training for future resilience. Every interaction becomes a lesson in human nature and compassion. The 8th technique is the cultivation of what the Stoics called sympathia, the recognition that all things are interconnected in a vast web of mutual influence and support. This isn't mystical thinking, but practical wisdom about how individual well-being connects to collective flourishing. When you truly understand that your happiness is intertwined with the happiness of others, several things happen naturally. First, you become less likely to pursue your own interests at the expense of others because you recognize that such actions ultimately harm yourself as well. Second, you develop genuine compassion because you see that everyone is struggling with similar challenges in different forms. Third, you find meaning in contributing to something larger than your personal concerns. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself regularly that he was part of a larger organism, like a hand that exists to serve the body, or a branch that draws life from the tree. This perspective helped him find purpose in his responsibilities as emperor and meaning in his service to the Roman people, even when those duties were burdensome or thankless. This interconnected view also provides comfort during difficult times. When you're facing challenges, you can remember that countless others have faced similar struggles and found ways to not just survive, but grow through them. Your pain connects you to the broader human experience rather than isolating you in private suffering. The ninth technique involves developing what we might call philosophical patience, the ability to work with time rather than against it. The Stoics understood that meaningful change often happens slowly, like the gradual formation of canyons by flowing water or the quiet growth of oak trees over decades. In our instant gratification culture, this wisdom feels particularly relevant. We expect quick results from our efforts, immediate relief from our problems, and rapid progress toward our goals. But the most important developments in human life, the cultivation of character, the deepening of wisdom, the building of meaningful relationships, these unfold according to their own natural rhythms. Epictetus often reminded his students that becoming wise is like learning to play a musical instrument. You can't rush the process or skip the basic exercises. Each day of practice builds upon previous days, creating gradual improvement that eventually blossoms into mastery. But this requires patience with yourself and trust in the process. This philosophical patience also applies to dealing with other people. Instead of expecting others to immediately understand your perspective or change their behavior, you learn to plant seeds of wisdom and kindness, trusting that they'll grow in their own time. You focus on being a positive influence rather than trying to control outcomes. The 10th technique is what the Stoics called preferred indifference, a sophisticated understanding of how to engage with worldly goods without becoming enslaved to them. Health, wealth, reputation, these things are naturally preferable to their opposites, but they're not essential for happiness or virtue. This doesn't mean becoming an ascetic or rejecting all material goods. It means holding them lightly, enjoying them when they're present, and remaining equanimous when they're absent. You can appreciate a beautiful sunset without needing to own the sky. You can enjoy a delicious meal without requiring gourmet food at every sitting. Seneca, despite being one of the wealthiest men in Rome, regularly practiced voluntary discomfort to maintain his independence from luxury. He would sleep on the floor, eat simple food, and wear plain clothes, not because he believed these things were inherently better, but because he wanted to prove to himself that his happiness didn't depend on external comforts. This practice builds what we might call philosophical muscle memory. When genuine hardships arise, you're not devastated because you've already proven to yourself that you can be content with less. When good fortune comes, you enjoy it fully, but don't cling desperately to it because you know your essential well-being doesn't depend on it. The 11th technique involves cultivating what the Stoics called the view from above, periodically stepping back from your immediate concerns to see them in broader perspective. Imagine yourself rising high above your current situation, seeing your problems from the viewpoint of years or decades, or even from the perspective of the cosmos itself. Marcus Aurelius regularly practiced this mental exercise, reminding himself that even the Roman Empire was a tiny part of a vast universe, and that his own reign was a brief moment in the long sweep of history. This wasn't to diminish the importance of his responsibilities, but to keep them in proper perspective and prevent them from overwhelming his peace of mind. When you're stuck in traffic, frustrated by delays and feeling like your time is being wasted, the view from above might remind you that this moment is infinitesimally small in the context of your entire life. When you're worried about what others think of your choices, this perspective might help you remember that most people are too busy with their own concerns to spend much time judging yours. This cosmic perspective doesn't make your problems unreal or unimportant, but it does prevent them from consuming your entire mental landscape. It's like adjusting the zoom on a camera. Sometimes you need to focus closely on details, but sometimes you need to pull back to see the bigger picture. The 12th technique is the practice of morning reflection, beginning each day with intentional thought about how you want to meet whatever challenges arise. The Stoics understood that your mental state when you wake up often sets the tone for your entire day, so they developed practices to start from a place of wisdom and purpose. Marcus Aurelius wrote some of his most famous passages as morning meditations, reminding himself of Stoic principles before facing the day's responsibilities. He would reflect on the likelihood of encountering difficult people and situations, not to become pessimistic, but to prepare his mind to respond with virtue rather than react with frustration. You might try beginning your day with a few quiet moments of reflection. What qualities do you want to embody today? How do you want to respond if things don't go according to plan? What would it look like to act from your highest values throughout the day? This isn't about creating rigid expectations, but about setting intentions that can guide you when decisions arise. This morning practice also includes gratitude for the simple fact of being alive and aware. Before worrying about what you need to accomplish or what problems you need to solve, you can appreciate the fundamental gift of consciousness itself, the ability to think and feel and choose and love. As we've explored these 12 techniques tonight, you might notice that they all point toward a fundamental shift in how you relate to life's challenges. Instead of seeing difficulties as obstacles to happiness, you begin to see them as opportunities for growth. Instead of demanding that life conform to your preferences, you learn to find peace within whatever circumstances arise. The Stoics discovered something profound about human nature that remains true today. We have far more control over our inner state than we typically realize, and simultaneously, far less control over external circumstances than we usually assume. This insight, fully understood and consistently applied, can transform your relationship with everything from minor daily frustrations to major life crises. But remember, developing an unbreakable mind is not about becoming invulnerable to pain or immune to sorrow. It's about learning to carry these experiences with grace, to let them deepen your compassion rather than harden your heart, and to use them as fuel for wisdom rather than bitterness. The ancient Stoics lived through plagues, wars, exiles, and personal losses that would challenge anyone's resilience. Yet they found ways to maintain their inner freedom, to act with virtue, and to contribute meaningfully to their communities. Their techniques have been tested not in comfortable philosophical discussions, but in the crucible of real human suffering and triumph. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you might reflect on which of these practices resonates most strongly with your current situation. Perhaps you're drawn to the discipline of assent, learning to pause before reacting. Maybe the practice of negative visualization appeals to you as a way of deepening gratitude. Or perhaps the view from above offers relief from whatever immediate concerns are weighing on your mind. The 13th technique involves what the Stoics called the discipline of perception, the art of seeing clearly through the fog of our assumptions and emotional reactions. Most of our suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the stories we tell ourselves about those events. A delayed flight becomes a personal catastrophe. A critical comment becomes evidence of our worthlessness. A minor setback becomes proof that we're destined to fail. But what if you could learn to see these situations more clearly, stripping away the dramatic narratives and emotional embellishments to perceive what's actually happening? This isn't about becoming cold or analytical, but about developing the clarity that allows wise action to emerge naturally. Imagine you're walking through a forest at dusk, and you see what appears to be a dangerous snake coiled on the path ahead. Your heart races, adrenaline floods your system, and you freeze in terror. But as you look more carefully, you realize it's just a curved branch that fell from a tree above. The fear was real, but it was based on a misperception. The Stoics understood that many of our daily anxieties follow this same pattern. This technique requires developing what we might call philosophical curiosity about your own reactions. When something upsets you, instead of immediately accepting that upset as justified, you can pause and ask what assumptions might be driving your response. Are you certain about the facts of the situation? Are you interpreting someone else's actions through the lens of your own fears? or past experiences? Are you adding layers of meaning that may not actually be there? Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly, examining his own perceptions with the same rigor he might apply to military intelligence. He understood that acting on false information, whether in warfare or in daily life, leads to poor outcomes. So he developed the habit of questioning his initial impressions, looking for the simple facts beneath his emotional reactions. The 14th technique is the cultivation of what the Stoics called preferred indifference toward praise and blame. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to feedback or guidance, but rather developing independence from the constant need for external validation or the fear of criticism. Think about how much mental energy you spend worrying about what others think of you. How often do you modify your behavior not because it aligns with your values, but because you're trying to manage other people's opinions? How much of your self-worth depends on receiving approval from others? The Stoics recognized that this dependency on external validation makes you vulnerable to manipulation and prevents you from acting authentically. When your peace of mind depends on others' approval, you give them power over your inner state. When you fear criticism above all else, you become paralyzed and unable to take meaningful action. Epictetus taught that praise and blame are like the weather, natural phenomena that come and go according to forces beyond your control. You can't prevent rain by worrying about it, and you can't guarantee sunshine by desperately wanting it. Similarly, you can't control whether others approve or disapprove of your choices, so basing your decisions on their potential reactions is ultimately futile. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or dismissive of others' perspectives. Wise feedback from trusted friends can be invaluable for growth and learning. But the Stoics distinguished between considering others' input and being enslaved to their opinions. You can listen carefully to criticism while maintaining your inner equilibrium. You can appreciate praise while not becoming dependent on it. The 15th technique involves developing what we might call philosophical detachment from outcomes while maintaining passionate engagement with the process. This is perhaps one of the most subtle and powerful aspects of Stoic practice. The ability to care deeply about your efforts while holding lightly to results. Imagine a gardener who plants seeds with great care and attention. She prepares the soil thoughtfully, waters regularly, and tends to the plants with genuine love. But she also understands that many factors beyond her control will influence the harvest. Weather, soil conditions, insects, and countless other variables will play their part in determining the outcome. The wise gardener doesn't become less caring or less diligent because she can't control these variables. Instead, she focuses her energy on what she can influence, while accepting that the results will be what they will be. This approach actually allows her to tend her garden with greater joy and less anxiety because she's not carrying the impossible burden of controlling forces beyond her reach. This principle applies beautifully to human relationships, creative endeavors, career goals, and virtually every aspect of life. You can pour your heart into a friendship while accepting that the other person may not reciprocate equally. You can write a book with passion and dedication while understanding that its reception is largely outside your control. You can pursue a career goal with determination while remaining flexible about how and when it might manifest. The 16th technique is the practice of evening review, but approached with what we might call philosophical gentleness. This isn't about harsh self-judgment or perfectionist analysis, but rather the kind of loving attention you might give to a dear friend who's trying to grow and learn. Each evening, as you prepare for sleep, you can gently review the day's events like a compassionate observer. Where did you act from wisdom? Where did you react from emotion? What situations challenged your peace of mind? And how might you approach similar challenges differently in the future? But here's the crucial element. This review is conducted with the understanding that making mistakes is part of the human experience. The Stoics weren't trying to become perfect beings who never felt anger or fear or sadness. They were trying to become wiser human beings who could learn from their experiences and gradually develop better responses to life's challenges. Seneca wrote that each day offers new opportunities to practice virtue, and that setbacks are simply information about where your practice needs attention. If you lost your temper during a difficult conversation, that's not evidence of your failure as a person. It's feedback about where you might focus your philosophical work. If you felt overwhelmed by anxiety about future events, that's not a character flaw. It's an invitation to practice the techniques for focusing on what's truly within your control. The 17th technique involves what the Stoics called the discipline of desire, specifically applied to time and aging. This is about developing a healthy relationship with the passage of time, neither clinging desperately to youth nor rushing anxiously toward future goals. In our culture, we often treat aging as an enemy to be fought, or a tragedy to be mourned. We spend enormous energy trying to stop or reverse the natural process of growing older, or we become depressed about the limitations that come with advancing years. The Stoics took a radically different approach. They saw each stage of life as having its own gifts and challenges, its own opportunities for growth and contribution. A child has the gift of wonder and curiosity. A young adult has energy and possibility. A middle-aged person has experience and responsibility. An elder has wisdom and perspective. Each season of life offers something valuable, and trying to remain permanently in one season means missing the richness of the others. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his later years while dealing with the physical challenges of age and illness, didn't spend his time lamenting his lost youth. Instead, he focused on how his experiences had deepened his understanding of life and increased his capacity for wisdom and compassion. This doesn't mean becoming passive about health or giving up on dreams because you're getting older. It means engaging fully with whatever stage of life you're in, while accepting its natural rhythms and changes. You can exercise and eat well, while accepting that your body will age. You can pursue new goals, while understanding that your energy and capabilities may be different than they were in previous decades. The 18th technique is the cultivation of what we might call cosmic humility, the recognition that you are part of something vastly larger and more complex than your individual concerns. This perspective can be profoundly comforting during times when personal problems feel overwhelming. When the Stoics looked up at the night sky, they didn't see a pretty decoration for human entertainment. They saw a reminder of their place in an unimaginably vast and ancient cosmos. The light reaching their eyes had travelled across space for years or centuries. The stars they observed were part of processes that had been unfolding for billions of years and would continue long after their own brief lives had ended. This cosmic perspective doesn't diminish the importance of human life or make individual concerns meaningless. Instead, it provides a broader context that can help you hold your problems more lightly. The argument you had with your partner, the work stress you're experiencing, the financial worries that keep you awake at night, these are real and important within the scope of your life, but they're also temporary fluctuations in a much larger pattern. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that entire civilizations had risen and fallen, that countless generations of humans had lived and died, and that the problems that seemed so pressing in his time would eventually be forgotten. This wasn't to make him feel insignificant, but to help him maintain perspective and focus his energy on what truly mattered. The 19th technique involves developing what the Stoics called sympathetic joy, the ability to find genuine happiness in others' good fortune rather than feeling threatened or diminished by their success. This practice can transform your relationship with comparison and envy, two of the most common sources of modern unhappiness. In our social media age, we're constantly exposed to curated versions of other people's lives, their achievements, travels, relationships, and possessions. It's natural to sometimes feel that our own lives pale in comparison, that we're falling behind in some cosmic competition, or that others' happiness somehow diminishes the possibility of our own. But the Stoics understood that happiness isn't a limited resource that gets depleted when others experience it. Joy shared is joy multiplied, not divided. When someone you know achieves a goal they've worked toward, gets good news about their health, or experiences a moment of genuine happiness, you have a choice about how to respond. You can feel threatened, wondering why good things happen to them but not to you. You can feel envious, wishing you had what they have, or you can feel genuinely happy for them, recognizing that their joy adds to the total amount of joy in the world rather than subtracting from your potential share. This sympathetic joy becomes easier when you remember that everyone faces challenges, even those whose lives seem perfect from the outside. The person celebrating a promotion may also be dealing with family difficulties. The couple posting happy photos may have worked through serious relationship challenges to reach that joy. The friend who seems to have everything figured out may be struggling with anxieties or health concerns they don't share publicly. The 20th technique is the practice of philosophical friendship, surrounding yourself with people who support your growth toward wisdom and virtue rather than enabling your worst impulses or encouraging you to remain stuck in patterns that don't serve you. The Stoics understood that we're profoundly influenced by the people we spend time with. If you're surrounded by people who complain constantly, who blame others for their problems, who pursue pleasure without regard for consequences, you'll find it much harder to develop the qualities of wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline. But if you can find even one or two people who share your interest in living wisely, who encourage your better impulses, who challenge you to grow while accepting you as you are, these relationships become invaluable support for your philosophical practice. This doesn't mean surrounding yourself only with people who think exactly as you do, or abandoning friends who don't share your interest in philosophy. It means being intentional about seeking out relationships that nourish your highest aspirations while being a source of that same kind of support for others. Seneca's letters to Lucilius provide a beautiful model of philosophical friendship. These two men encouraged each other's growth, shared their struggles and insights, and provided mutual support for living according to Stoic principles. Their correspondence shows how friendship can become a vehicle for wisdom rather than just entertainment or mutual complaint. As we near the end of our exploration tonight, I want to emphasize something important about these Stoic techniques. They're not meant to be implemented all at once or mastered quickly. Like learning to play a musical instrument or developing any skill, they require patience, practice, and gentle persistence. You might find that one or two of these practices resonate strongly with your current situation and life circumstances. Perhaps the discipline of focusing on what's within your control feels particularly relevant, or maybe the practice of negative visualization appeals to you as a way of cultivating gratitude. Start with what calls to you rather than trying to adopt every technique simultaneously. The Stoics themselves were learners throughout their lives, constantly refining their understanding and application of these principles. Marcus Aurelius, despite being the most powerful man in the world, filled his private journal with reminders about basic Stoic practices, evidence that even advanced practitioners need to return regularly to fundamental principles. Remember, too, that developing an unbreakable mind doesn't mean becoming unfeeling or invulnerable. The goal is resilience, not rigidity. You want to develop the ability to bend with life's storms without breaking, to feel deeply without being destroyed by those feelings, and to maintain your essential values and inner freedom regardless of external circumstances. The word unbreakable, as we've explored, is more like water than like steel. Water yields to obstacles while maintaining its essential nature. It finds ways around, over, or through whatever blocks its path. It can be frozen or heated, but it remains fundamentally water. This is the kind of strength these ancient practices can help you develop. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, you might reflect on the profound wisdom of these philosophers who lived over 2,000 years ago, yet understood something timeless about human nature and the path to genuine peace. Their insights remain relevant because the fundamental challenges of being human, dealing with loss, facing uncertainty, managing difficult emotions, finding meaning in suffering, these haven't changed despite all our technological and social progress. The techniques we've explored tonight offer a path toward what the Stoics called ataraxia, a state of calm equanimity that isn't dependent on external circumstances. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of wisdom. Not the elimination of challenges, but the development of better responses to them. As you drift towards sleep, remember that every day offers new opportunities to practice these ancient arts of living. Every interaction, every challenge, every moment of joy or sorrow becomes a chance to apply these principles and gradually build the kind of resilient wisdom that can carry you through whatever life brings. The Stoics believed that philosophy wasn't just an intellectual exercise, but a way of life, a daily practice of choosing wisdom over reactivity, virtue over convenience, and inner freedom over external validation. These aren't abstract concepts, but practical tools for navigating the very real challenges of human existence with grace, courage, and compassion. Sweet dreams, and may these ancient wisdoms accompany you gently into rest and renewal. The 21st technique involves what the Stoics called the art of philosophical breathing, though they wouldn't have used quite those words. This is about learning to use your breath as an anchor to the present moment, a way of returning to clarity when your mind becomes clouded by worry or overwhelmed by emotion. When Marcus Aurelius found himself caught up in the swirling complexities of imperial politics or personal grief, he would often pause and simply observe his breathing, not trying to change it or control it, but using it as a reminder that in this moment, right now, he was alive and capable of choosing his response to whatever was happening around him. Your breath is always available to you as a pathway back to peace. When you notice your mind racing with anxious thoughts about the future or replaying painful moments from the past, you can gently return your attention to the simple rhythm of breathing in and breathing out. This isn't escapism or avoidance, it's a way of grounding yourself in the only moment where you actually have any power to act, the present. Try this now if you'd like, without changing anything about your breathing. Simply notice it. Feel the air entering your lungs, the slight pause before you exhale, the gentle release as you breathe out. Notice how this simple awareness brings you fully into this moment, away from whatever concerns might be pulling your attention toward past or future. The Stoics understood that presence is the foundation of wisdom. You can't respond wisely to a situation if your mind is scattered across time and space, worrying about things that have already happened or might never occur. But when you're fully present, you have access to all your resources, your intelligence, your compassion, your creativity, your courage. The 20-second technique is what we might call the practice of philosophical gratitude, but approached with the depth and sophistication that characterizes all Stoic practices. This isn't about forcing yourself to feel thankful when you're genuinely struggling or pretending that difficult circumstances are somehow blessings in disguise. Instead, it's about developing the capacity to notice and appreciate what the Stoics called the ordinary miracles that surround you constantly. The fact that your heart beats without your conscious effort. The reality that you can see colours and shapes, hear sounds and music, taste flavours, and feel textures. The profound mystery that you exist at all in a universe that might just as easily have been empty of consciousness. Epictetus, who knew suffering intimately from his years as a slave, didn't practice gratitude as a denial of hardship, but as a recognition of the gifts that persist even in difficult circumstances. He could appreciate the warmth of sunlight on his skin even when his circumstances were harsh. He could find joy in philosophical conversation even when his freedom was restricted. This kind of gratitude isn't dependent on having your preferences met or your problems solved. It's based on the simple wonder of being alive and aware in a universe full of beauty and meaning. When you develop this capacity, you discover that there's always something to appreciate, even in your darkest moments. Think about this for a moment. The light that allowed you to see today began its journey from the sun 8 minutes ago, traveling across the vastness of space to reach your eyes at just the right wavelengths to create the experience of vision. The air you're breathing has been part of countless other living beings throughout history, connecting you to every creature that has ever lived. The very atoms that make up your body were forged in the hearts of ancient stars. These aren't poetic exaggerations, but scientific facts that point to the profound interconnectedness and wonder of existence. The Stoics found that contemplating these realities helped them maintain perspective during difficult times and deepen their appreciation for the gift of consciousness. The 23rd technique involves developing what we might call philosophical courage, the willingness to face life's uncertainties without demanding guarantees or trying to control outcomes beyond your influence. This isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act wisely despite fear. Every day presents moments that require small acts of courage, speaking honestly in a difficult conversation, making a decision without perfect information, standing up for your values when it's unpopular, reaching out to someone when you're not sure how they'll respond. These aren't dramatic, heroic acts, but they require the same fundamental quality that the Stoics cultivated: the willingness to do what seems right, regardless of the outcome. Seneca wrote about how courage grows through practice, like a muscle that becomes stronger through regular use. Each time you choose to act from wisdom rather than fear, you build your capacity for future courageous action. Each time you do the right thing despite uncertainty about results, you strengthen your philosophical backbone. This courage isn't reckless or foolhardy. The Stoics were careful thinkers who considered consequences and acted prudently, but they understood that waiting for perfect certainty or guaranteed outcomes often means never acting at all, and that paralysis in the face of life's natural uncertainties can become its own form of suffering. The 24th technique is the cultivation of what the Stoics called preferred indifference toward comfort and discomfort. This involves developing a more sophisticated relationship with pleasure and pain, enjoying good experiences without becoming dependent on them, and enduring difficult experiences without being destroyed by them. This doesn't mean becoming ascetic or rejecting all pleasures. Marcus Aurelius enjoyed good food, beautiful art, and the company of friends, but he held these pleasures lightly, appreciating them when they were present without requiring them for his happiness. He understood the difference between enjoying something and being enslaved to it. Similarly, when faced with physical discomfort, emotional pain, or difficult circumstances, he didn't deny that these experiences were unpleasant. But he also didn't let them determine his inner state or compromise his ability to act virtuously. Pain was pain, but it didn't have to become suffering. Discomfort was discomfort, but it didn't have to become despair. You might practice this by occasionally choosing minor discomforts voluntarily, not as punishment, but as training. Taking cold showers, sitting in uncomfortable positions for short periods, fasting occasionally, walking in unpleasant weather. These small practices build your confidence that you can remain equanimous even when conditions aren't optimal. The 25th technique involves what we might call the discipline of philosophical speech, learning to use words as tools for wisdom rather than weapons for ego or shields for insecurity. The Stoics understood that how you speak both reflects and shapes your character, and they developed practices for communicating with greater clarity, kindness, and truth. This begins with the simple recognition that words have power. They can heal or harm, clarify or confuse, connect or divide. When you speak carelessly, you often create unnecessary suffering for yourself and others. When you speak mindfully, you contribute to understanding and peace. Epictetus taught his students to pause before speaking and ask themselves whether their words would serve truth and kindness. Is what I'm about to say accurate? Is it helpful? Is it necessary? Will it contribute to understanding or merely to my own ego gratification? This doesn't mean becoming silent or avoiding difficult conversations. Sometimes truth requires saying things that others don't want to hear. Sometimes kindness means setting boundaries or expressing disagreement. But the Stoics distinguished between speaking from wisdom and speaking from reactivity, between words that serve a higher purpose and words that merely vent emotion. The 26th technique is the practice of philosophical listening, developing the capacity to truly hear what others are saying rather than simply waiting for your turn to speak or filtering their words through your own assumptions and agenda. Most of us listen poorly because we're preoccupied with formulating our response, defending our position, or proving our point. But the Stoics understood that genuine listening is a form of respect and compassion, a way of honoring the other person's experience and perspective, even when you disagree with their conclusions. When someone is speaking to you, especially about something important to them, try setting aside your own thoughts and reactions temporarily. Instead of judging what they're saying or preparing your counter-argument, simply try to understand their perspective. What are they really trying to communicate? What emotions or concerns might be driving their words? What would it feel like to see the situation through their eyes? This kind of listening often leads to surprising insights and deeper connection. You might discover that what seemed like an unreasonable position actually makes sense from their point of view. You might realize that their anger or frustration is masking hurt or fear. You might find common ground that wasn't apparent when you were focused on your differences. The 27th technique involves developing what the Stoics called the long view, the ability to see current events and challenges in the context of larger patterns and longer time frames. This perspective can provide both comfort during difficult periods and wisdom for making important decisions. When you're in the midst of a crisis, it often feels like the current situation will last forever, that the pain or confusion or uncertainty will never end. But the Stoics regularly reminded themselves that everything changes, that no condition, whether pleasant or unpleasant, is permanent. Marcus Aurelius would sometimes imagine himself looking back on current difficulties from years in the future. How would this problem appear to him from that distance? What would he wish he had remembered during this challenging time? What response would he be proud of when he looked back on this moment? This long view also applies to decision-making. When faced with choices, particularly difficult ones, you can ask yourself how you might view this decision in a year, 5 years, or at the end of your life. What choice would align with your deepest values? What path would you be glad you took, regardless of how things turn out? The 28th technique is the cultivation of philosophical flexibility, the ability to adapt your approach when circumstances change while maintaining your core principles. This is about learning to bend without breaking, to adjust your methods while staying true to your values. Life rarely unfolds according to our plans. The career path you thought you wanted might prove unsuitable. The relationship you invested in might end unexpectedly. The health you took for granted might become compromised. The economic conditions you planned around might shift dramatically. The Stoics understood that rigidity in the face of changing circumstances often leads to unnecessary suffering. If you can only be happy under very specific conditions, you're likely to be unhappy much of the time. But if you can find ways to live virtuously and meaningfully, regardless of external conditions, you have a kind of freedom that can't be taken away by circumstances. This flexibility isn't the same as having no standards or principles. It's about distinguishing between what's essential and what's merely preferred, between your core values and your specific plans for expressing those values. The 29th technique involves what we might call the practice of philosophical rest, learning to truly relax and restore yourself without guilt or anxiety about productivity. The Stoics understood that sustainable wisdom requires periods of genuine renewal times when you step back from striving and simply allow yourself to be. In our culture that glorifies busyness and constant achievement, guilty when we're not actively working toward, this can feel almost revolutionary. We often feel some goal or solving some problem, but the Stoics recognize that this attitude ultimately undermines both effectiveness and happiness. True rest isn't just physical inactivity, but mental and emotional restoration. It's allowing your mind to wander without agenda, letting your body relax without pressure to accomplish anything, spending time in nature or in activities that restore your sense of wonder and connection. This kind of rest actually supports your philosophical practice because it prevents the exhaustion and resentment that can develop when you're constantly pushing yourself. When you're truly rested, you have more resources for responding to challenges with wisdom rather than reactivity. The 30th and final technique we'll explore tonight is what the Stoics called the discipline of love, though they might have described it differently. This is about learning to care deeply for yourself and others without attachment to specific outcomes, to love with an open hand rather than a closed fist. This might sound contradictory. How can you love deeply while remaining unattached? But the Stoics understood that true love actually requires a kind of letting go, a willingness to allow the people you care about to be themselves, rather than trying to control or change them to meet your preferences. When you love someone with attachment, you're actually loving your idea of who they should be rather than who they actually are. You become frustrated when they don't meet your expectations, disappointed when they make choices you wouldn't make, hurt when they don't reciprocate your feelings in exactly the way you want. But when you love with philosophical detachment, you can appreciate people for who they are while allowing them the freedom to grow, change, make mistakes, and follow their own path. This doesn't mean caring less, it often means caring more truly and more sustainably. This same principle applies to loving yourself. You can care for your own growth and well-being without becoming obsessed with self-improvement or devastated by your imperfections. You can work toward your goals without making your self-worth dependent on achieving them. You can acknowledge your mistakes without letting them define your identity. As our exploration draws to a close tonight, I want to return to where we began, with the question of what it means to have an unbreakable mind. Through these 30 techniques, we've seen that such a mind isn't rigid or invulnerable, but flexible and resilient. It's not a mind that never experiences difficulty, but one that has learned to work skillfully with whatever arises. The Stoics developed these practices not in comfortable philosophical salons, but in the midst of real human challenges. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations while leading military campaigns and managing a plague-ridden empire. Epictetus taught his students while dealing with the lasting effects of slavery and physical disability. Seneca navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics while trying to live according to his principles. Their wisdom wasn't theoretical, but practical, tested in the crucible of actual experience. They discovered that inner freedom is possible regardless of external circumstances, that peace can coexist with challenge, and that meaning can be found even in suffering. These techniques they developed aren't ancient relics, but living tools that remain remarkably relevant for navigating modern life. The specific challenges we face may be different, but the fundamental human experiences of loss, uncertainty, conflict, and mortality remain unchanged. Building an unbreakable mind isn't about becoming superhuman or eliminating all vulnerability from your life. It's about developing the wisdom to respond rather than merely react, the courage to face uncertainty without being paralyzed by it, and the compassion to remain open-hearted even when life disappoints or hurts you. Like water finding its way around obstacles, an unbreakable mind learns to work with life's challenges rather than against them. It discovers strength not in rigidity, but in adaptability, not in control, but in acceptance of what cannot be changed, combined with wise action regarding what can be influenced. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, you might reflect on which of these ancient practices speaks most clearly to your current situation. Perhaps you're drawn to the discipline of focusing on what's within your control, or maybe the practice of viewing challenges as opportunities for growth resonates with your experience. Remember that the Stoics themselves were lifelong students of these principles, constantly refining their understanding and application. You don't need to master everything at once or implement every technique simultaneously. Start with what calls to you, practice it gently and consistently, and let your understanding deepen naturally over time. The path toward an unbreakable mind is itself a form of philosophical practice, requiring patience with yourself, compassion for your inevitable setbacks, and faith in your capacity, these ancient wisdoms, to choose response over reaction, wisdom over impulse to grow and learn. Each day offers new opportunities to apply virtue over convenience. As you drift into sleep, carried by these timeless insights from minds that grappled with the same fundamental questions that occupy us today, remember that you're part of a long tradition of human beings seeking to live with greater wisdom, courage, and compassion. Their discoveries can illuminate your path, but ultimately, you must walk it yourself, one mindful step at a time. The unbreakable mind they pointed toward isn't a destination, but a way of travelling, not an achievement but a practice, not a state of perfection, but a commitment to growing in wisdom and virtue regardless of what life brings. May these ancient teachings accompany you gently into rest, and may you wake tomorrow with renewed commitment to the beautiful, challenging work of becoming who you're capable of being. Sweet dreams, and may the wisdom of ages whisper softly through your rest, preparing you for whatever tomorrow may hold. The 31st technique involves what the Stoics called the art of philosophical solitude, the ability to be truly alone with yourself without feeling restless, bored, or anxious. This isn't about isolation or withdrawal from others, but about developing a comfortable relationship with your own company, your own thoughts, and the quiet spaces between activities. In our hyper-connected age, we've largely lost the capacity for genuine solitude. We reach for our phones the moment we feel uncomfortable with silence. We fill every quiet moment with podcasts, music, or conversation. We've become afraid of our own minds, worried about what we might discover if we sit quietly with ourselves for more than a few minutes. But the Stoics understood that solitude is where wisdom grows. It's in the quiet moments, when you're not performing for others or distracted by external stimulation, that you can hear the voice of your deeper self. It's in solitude that you can examine your thoughts and reactions without judgment. Reflect on your experiences without the pressure to entertain or impress anyone else. Marcus Aurelius found some of his deepest insights during moments of solitude, often writing in his journal during quiet evening hours or early mornings before the demands of imperial duties began. These weren't moments of loneliness, but of profound connection with himself and with the larger patterns of existence. You might try setting aside a few minutes each day for intentional solitude. Not meditation with a specific technique or goal, but simply sitting quietly with yourself. Notice what arises when you're not trying to accomplish anything, or go anywhere, or become anyone other than who you already are. This practice builds what we might call philosophical self-sufficiency, the confidence that you can be content in your own company. The 30-second technique is the cultivation of what we might call sacred ordinary awareness, learning to find depth and meaning in the simple activities that make up daily life. The Stoics understood that spiritual insight doesn't require dramatic experiences or exotic practices, but can be found in the most mundane moments if you approach them with the right attention. When you wash dishes, you can simply rush through the chore while your mind races ahead to the next task. Or you can feel the warm water on your hands, notice the way soap creates iridescent bubbles, appreciate the simple satisfaction of transforming something dirty into something clean. This isn't about making dishwashing mystical, but about bringing full presence to whatever you're doing. Epictetus taught that every moment offers an opportunity to practice virtue and cultivate wisdom. Waiting in line becomes a chance to practice patience. A difficult conversation becomes an opportunity to speak truthfully with kindness. Even mundane tasks like preparing food or organizing your living space can become expressions of care and mindfulness. This approach transforms the texture of daily life. Instead of seeing routine activities as obstacles to more important pursuits, you begin to recognize them as the actual substance of your existence. Your life isn't something that happens between the ordinary moments. It is the ordinary moments elevated by the quality of attention you bring to them. The 33rd technique involves developing what the Stoics called philosophical hospitality, the practice of welcoming whatever experiences arise in your life as guests who might have something to teach you, even when those guests are unwelcome or uncomfortable. This doesn't mean pretending to enjoy painful experiences or becoming passive in the face of injustice, but it does mean approaching even difficult emotions and challenging circumstances with a kind of curious openness rather than automatic resistance. When anxiety arises, instead of immediately trying to push it away or fix it, you might pause and ask what this anxiety is trying to tell you. Is it highlighting something that genuinely needs attention? Is it revealing an area where you're trying to control something beyond your influence? When anger surfaces, you might explore what values or boundaries are being threatened, what this emotion might be attempting to protect. This philosophical hospitality extends to the people in your life as well. The difficult colleague who irritates you might be teaching you patience. The family member who challenges your beliefs might be showing you where your own thinking has become rigid. The friend who disappoints you might be revealing your own expectations and attachments. This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior or failing to set appropriate boundaries, but it does mean approaching even challenging relationships with the question of what you might learn from them, how they might serve your growth in wisdom and compassion. The 34th technique is the practice of what we might call philosophical dying, regularly contemplating your own mortality, not to become morbid or depressed, but to clarify your priorities and live with greater authenticity and urgency about what truly matters. The Stoics believed that death awareness was one of the most powerful tools for living well. When you truly accept that your time is limited, that every day brings you closer to the end of this particular existence, it becomes much easier to distinguish between what's essential and what's merely distracting. Think about how you would live differently if you knew you had only 1 year left. What relationships would you prioritize? What activities would you eliminate? What words would you speak that you've been holding back? What experiences would you make time for that you've been postponing? This contemplation isn't meant to create anxiety, but to create clarity. Most of the things we worry about, most of the grudges we hold, most of the fears that paralyze us become much less significant when viewed against the backdrop of our finite existence. Marcus Aurelius regularly reminded himself that he would die, that everyone he loved would die, that the Roman Empire itself would eventually pass away. This wasn't pessimism, but realism, and it helped him focus his energy on what he could contribute during his brief time on Earth, rather than getting lost in petty concerns or ego-driven pursuits. The 35th technique involves cultivating what the Stoics called the discipline of philosophical generosity, learning to give freely of your time, attention, resources, and goodwill without keeping score or expecting specific returns on your investments. This generosity begins with how you treat yourself. Can you offer yourself the same kindness and patience you would give to a dear friend? Can you forgive your mistakes without harsh self-condemnation? Can you celebrate your successes without arrogance or your efforts without demanding perfection? This self-compassion then naturally extends outward. When you're not constantly judging and criticizing yourself, you have more emotional resources available for supporting others. When you accept your own imperfections, you become more tolerant of others' flaws and limitations. Seneca practiced this by regularly giving gifts and offering help to others without any expectation of reciprocation. He understood that true generosity creates a kind of abundance that benefits the giver as much as the receiver. When you give freely, you experience your own capacity for kindness and connection. You remind yourself that you have enough to share, which creates a sense of prosperity regardless of your material circumstances. This philosophical generosity also applies to how you interpret others' actions. Instead of assuming the worst about people's motivations, you can practice giving them the benefit of the doubt. Instead of keeping careful track of who owes you what, you can offer your contributions freely and trust that the universe has its own way of maintaining balance. The 36th technique is the cultivation of what we might call philosophical wonder, maintaining a sense of curiosity and amazement about existence itself, even as you develop practical skills for navigating life's challenges. The Stoics weren't dry, purely rational thinkers who had lost touch with mystery and beauty. They were deeply moved by the elegance of the natural world, the complexity of human consciousness, and the profound questions that arise when you contemplate existence itself. Marcus Aurelius filled his writings with observations about the beauty of ordinary things, the way morning light falls across a room, the patterns created by flowing water, the intricate structure of a flower, or the graceful movement of animals. He saw these not just as pleasant diversions, but as reminders of the underlying intelligence and creativity that permeates reality. This philosophical wonder serves as an antidote to the cynicism and jadedness that can develop when you focus too exclusively on problems and difficulties. When you remember to notice the remarkable fact that anything exists at all, that consciousness has emerged from unconscious matter, that love and beauty and meaning have appeared in what might have been an empty universe, your own problems begin to feel less overwhelming. You can cultivate this wonder by regularly taking time to really look at the world around you. Watch clouds forming and dissolving in the sky. Notice the incredible complexity of a single leaf or the way light creates colors and shadows. Listen to music as if you are hearing organized sound for the first time. These practices don't solve practical problems, but they restore a sense of perspective and gratitude that makes those problems easier to bear. The 37th technique involves developing what the Stoics called the long patience, the ability to work steadily toward meaningful goals without becoming discouraged by the slow pace of progress or the inevitable setbacks that accompany any worthwhile endeavor. We live in an age of instant gratification, where we expect quick results from our efforts and rapid solutions to complex problems. But the most important developments in human life, the cultivation of wisdom, the building of strong relationships, the creation of meaningful work, the development of good character, these unfold according to their own natural rhythms. The Stoics understood that meaningful change often happens so gradually as to be almost imperceptible, day by day, like the way a tree grows or a canyon forms. You can't force these processes to accelerate beyond their natural pace, but you can show up consistently and do your part with patience and faith in the long-term trajectory. This long patience applies to your own personal development as well. You might begin practicing Stoic principles with great enthusiasm, expecting rapid transformation in your emotional responses and life circumstances. But real change, in deeply ingrained patterns of thinking and reacting, often takes months or years of consistent practice. Instead of becoming discouraged when you find yourself falling back into old patterns, you can remember that setbacks are part of the process. Every time you notice yourself reacting with anger instead of wisdom, every time you catch yourself worrying about things beyond your control, you're actually making progress, because awareness is the first step toward change. The 38th technique is the practice of what we might call philosophical celebration, learning to acknowledge and appreciate progress and positive moments without becoming attached to them or demanding that they last forever. The Stoics weren't grim ascetics who rejected all pleasure and joy. They understood that celebration and gratitude are natural human responses to good fortune and achievement, and that these responses can deepen your appreciation for life's gifts when approached with wisdom. The key is learning to celebrate fully while holding lightly. When something wonderful happens in your life, you can feel genuine joy and gratitude without demanding that this state of affairs continue indefinitely. You can appreciate success without making it the foundation of your self-worth. You can enjoy pleasant experiences without becoming dependent on them for your happiness. This balanced approach to celebration actually allows you to enjoy positive experiences more fully because you're not simultaneously worrying about losing them. When you accept that everything changes, including good circumstances, you're free to be completely present to joy when it arises. Marcus Aurelius took pleasure in simple things: a good conversation with a friend, a beautiful sunset, a moment of quiet reflection. But he held these pleasures lightly, appreciating them without clinging to them, knowing that their temporary nature made them precious rather than diminished. The 39th technique involves cultivating what the Stoics called philosophical courage in the face of uncertainty, the willingness to make important decisions and take meaningful action even when you can't predict or control the outcomes. Life constantly presents us with situations where we must act without complete information or guarantees about results. Should you pursue a new career opportunity that might not work out? Should you have a difficult conversation that might damage a relationship? Should you invest time and energy in a creative project that might never find an audience? The Stoics understood that waiting for certainty often means never acting at all, and that the inability to tolerate uncertainty can become its own form of paralysis. They developed practices for making decisions based on virtue and wisdom, rather than on predictions about outcomes. When facing an uncertain choice, you can ask yourself, what action would align with my deepest values? What would I do if I were acting from courage rather than fear? How would I want to look back on this decision years from now, regardless of how things turn out? This doesn't mean acting recklessly or ignoring available information. The Stoics were careful thinkers who considered consequences and sought wise counsel. But they also understood that some level of uncertainty is unavoidable in any meaningful endeavor, and that the willingness to act despite uncertainty is often what separates a life of significance from a life of regret. The 40th and final technique we'll explore tonight is what the Stoics called the discipline of philosophical love for humanity, developing a deep appreciation and compassion for the human condition in all its complexity, including its flaws and limitations. This might seem surprising, given that the Stoics are sometimes portrayed as cold and detached from human emotion, but their writings reveal a profound tenderness toward humanity, an understanding that everyone is struggling with the same fundamental challenges of mortality, uncertainty, and the search for meaning. Marcus Aurelius wrote about how even difficult people are fellow travelers on the journey of life, dealing with their own fears and desires and limitations as best they can. Instead of becoming angry with them for their failures, he tried to see them with compassion, recognizing that their difficult behavior often stems from their own suffering and confusion. This philosophical love for humanity doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior or failing to protect yourself and others from those who might cause damage. But it does mean maintaining a fundamental goodwill toward human beings in general, remembering that everyone is doing the best they can with their current level of understanding and emotional development. This perspective transforms how you experience conflict and disappointment in relationships. Instead of seeing others' mistakes as personal attacks or character flaws, you can see them as expressions of their own struggles and limitations. This doesn't minimize the impact of their actions, but it allows you to respond with wisdom and compassion rather than reactive anger or resentment. As we conclude our gentle exploration of these 40 Stoic techniques for building an unbreakable mind, I want to emphasize once again that these practices are not meant to eliminate the natural human experiences of sadness, fear, anger, or uncertainty. They are tools for working with these experiences more skillfully, for finding wisdom and growth in the midst of life's inevitable challenges. The unbreakable mind that the Stoics cultivated was not a mind that never bent or flexed, but one that could bend without breaking, feel without being overwhelmed, care without becoming attached, and act without being paralyzed by uncertainty about outcomes. Their wisdom emerged from lived experience, from facing real challenges with courage and integrity, from learning to find meaning and purpose, even in difficult circumstances. They discovered that external conditions have far less power over our inner state than we typically assume, and that we have far more capacity for choosing our responses than we usually realize. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, you might reflect on how these ancient insights speak to your current situation. Perhaps you're facing a difficult decision and could benefit from the discipline of focusing on virtue rather than outcomes. Maybe you're struggling with disappointment and could find comfort in the practice of accepting what cannot be changed while acting wisely on what can be influenced. Or perhaps you're simply looking for ways to bring more peace and wisdom to ordinary daily life. And some of these techniques offer practical approaches for transforming routine activities into opportunities for growth and mindfulness. Remember that the Stoics themselves were lifelong students of these principles, constantly refining their understanding and application through decades of practice. They didn't expect perfection from themselves or others, but they maintained a steady commitment to growth in wisdom and virtue throughout their lives. The path toward an unbreakable mind is itself a form of philosophical practice, requiring patience with yourself, compassion for your inevitable mistakes and setbacks, and faith in your capacity to grow and learn. Each day offers new opportunities to apply these ancient wisdoms, to choose response over reaction, wisdom over impulse, virtue over convenience. As you drift into sleep, carried by these timeless insights from minds that grappled with the same fundamental questions that occupy thoughtful people in every era, remember that you're part of a long tradition of human beings seeking to live with greater wisdom, courage, and compassion. Their discoveries can illuminate your path, but ultimately you must walk it yourself, one mindful choice at a time, one conscious response at a time, one act of virtue at a time. The unbreakable mind they pointed toward is not a destination, but a way of travelling, not an achievement, but a practice, not a state of perfection, but a commitment to growing in wisdom and virtue, regardless of what life brings. May these ancient teachings accompany you gently into rest, and may you wake tomorrow with renewed appreciation for the remarkable opportunity of human consciousness, the profound gift of being alive and aware in a universe full of mystery and meaning. The Stoics believed that philosophy was not just an intellectual exercise, but a way of life, a daily practice of choosing wisdom over reactivity, courage over fear, compassion over judgment. Tonight, as their wisdom settles softly around your thoughts like evening mist, you join that ancient tradition of seekers who understood that true strength comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from cultivating inner freedom. Sweet dreams, and may the wisdom of ages whisper gently through your rest, preparing you for whatever tomorrow may hold, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have everything you need within yourself to meet it with grace. The 41st technique involves what we might call the art of philosophical detachment from your own story, learning to hold your personal narrative lightly rather than becoming imprisoned by it. We all carry stories about who we are, what we're capable of, what we deserve, and what our future holds. But the Stoics understood that these stories, while sometimes useful, can also become invisible cages that limit our growth and response to new circumstances. Think about the stories you tell yourself. Perhaps you believe you're not good with money, not naturally creative, too introverted for leadership, too old to change careers, or destined to repeat your family's patterns. These narratives feel true because they're based on past experiences and observations, but they're actually interpretations rather than facts, and interpretations can be examined and, when necessary, revised. Marcus Aurelius regularly questioned his own assumptions about himself and his role in the world. Despite being the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, he didn't let that identity define his worth or limit his capacity for humility and learning. He saw himself as a temporary steward of power rather than as someone inherently superior to others. This doesn't mean abandoning all sense of personal identity or ignoring your genuine strengths and weaknesses. It means holding your self-concept lightly enough that you can adapt and grow when circumstances call for it. When you're too attached to being the person who never asks for help, you might miss opportunities for connection and support. When you're convinced you're terrible at public speaking, you might avoid situations where your voice could make a difference. The 40-second technique is the cultivation of what the Stoics called philosophical momentum, the understanding that small, consistent actions aligned with virtue create compound effects that can transform your life over time. This isn't about dramatic gestures or sudden personality changes, but about the quiet power of steady practice. Consider how a river carves through stone. No single drop of water accomplishes this feat, but the persistent flow over years and decades creates canyons and valleys. Similarly, no single moment of choosing patience over anger will revolutionize your character, but thousands of such choices, accumulated over months and years, can fundamentally alter who you are and how you relate to the world. Epictetus taught that we become what we repeatedly do. If you want to become more courageous, you practice courage in small daily situations. If you want to develop greater compassion, you look for opportunities to respond to others with kindness and understanding. If you want to cultivate wisdom, you regularly pause to examine your assumptions and reactions. This understanding can be both humbling and encouraging. Humbling because it means you can't transform overnight through willpower alone. Encouraging because it means that anyone can create meaningful change through patient, consistent practice. You don't need to be extraordinary to develop an unbreakable mind. You just need to be persistent. The 43rd technique involves developing what we might call philosophical timing, learning to recognize when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent, when to persist and when to let go. The Stoics understood that wisdom involves not just knowing what to do, but knowing when to do it. There are seasons in life, just as there are seasons in nature. Sometimes the conditions are right for new beginnings, fresh starts, bold actions. Other times, the wisest course is patience, reflection, gathering strength for future opportunities. Learning to read these rhythms requires developing sensitivity to both your inner state and the circumstances around you. This isn't about becoming passive or using timing as an excuse for inaction. Sometimes the right moment is now, even when conditions aren't perfect. Sometimes courage requires moving forward, despite uncertainty or discomfort. But sometimes wisdom means recognizing that forcing action in unfavorable conditions will waste energy and create unnecessary struggle. Seneca wrote about how the wise person learns to work with natural timing rather than against it. Like a skilled sailor who understands how to use wind and current to reach their destination, the philosophical practitioner learns to navigate life's rhythms with patience and skill. The 44th technique is the practice of what we might call philosophical boundaries, learning to protect your inner peace and energy without becoming defensive or closed-hearted. This involves developing the capacity to say no to requests and demands that don't align with your values or serve your genuine well-being, while remaining open and generous in appropriate circumstances. Many people struggle with this balance. Either they become so accommodating that they exhaust themselves trying to please everyone, or they become so protective that they miss opportunities for meaningful connection and service. The Stoics sought a middle path that preserved both personal integrity and social responsibility. This means learning to distinguish between situations where flexibility and accommodation serve the greater good, and situations where firm boundaries are necessary to maintain your ability to act virtuously. Sometimes saying yes to one thing means saying no to something else, and wisdom lies in making these choices consciously rather than reactively. Marcus Aurelius had to learn this balance as emperor, finding ways to serve the Roman people without sacrificing his own well-being or compromising his principles. He understood that effective leadership required maintaining his own philosophical practice and inner stability, which sometimes meant setting limits on others' demands for his time and attention. The 45th technique involves cultivating what the Stoics called the discipline of philosophical presence. The ability to be fully engaged with whatever you're doing right now, rather than dividing your attention between multiple tasks or letting your mind wander to past regrets or future worries. In our multitasking culture, we've largely lost the art of doing one thing at a time with complete attention. We eat while checking email, have conversations while thinking about our to-do lists, and even try to relax while worrying about productivity. But the Stoics understood that this scattered attention diminishes both the quality of our work and our capacity for satisfaction. When you're having a conversation with someone, can you be completely present to that interaction? When you're walking, can you feel your feet touching the ground and notice your surroundings? When you're eating, can you taste your food and appreciate the nourishment it provides? This isn't about becoming obsessive or rigid about single tasking, but about developing the capacity to give your full attention to whatever deserves it. Some activities naturally go together, but many of our habitual multitasking patterns actually reduce our effectiveness and enjoyment. The 46th technique is the cultivation of what we might call philosophical resilience in the face of criticism and praise. The Stoics understood that both excessive attachment to approval and excessive fear of disapproval can compromise your ability to act according to your own best judgment and values. When someone criticizes you, the natural tendency is either to become defensive and angry or to immediately assume they're right and feel ashamed. When someone praises you, the tendency is either to dismiss their words or to become inflated with pride. But both criticism and praise are simply information, and wisdom lies in receiving them with equanimity while maintaining your own center. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to feedback or failing to learn from others' perspectives. Some criticism contains valuable insights that can help you grow. Some praise reflects genuine appreciation that it's appropriate to acknowledge and enjoy. But your fundamental sense of worth and direction shouldn't depend on others' opinions, whether positive or negative. Epictetus, who had experienced both the harsh criticism that comes with slavery and the praise that came with his later success as a teacher, developed remarkable independence from both extremes. He could listen to feedback without being destabilized by it, learning what was useful while maintaining his own philosophical center. The 47th technique involves developing what the Stoics called the long view of character development, understanding that becoming a person of wisdom and virtue is a lifelong process that unfolds through countless small choices and experiences rather than through dramatic transformations. We often expect moral and emotional growth to follow the same pattern as academic learning, where you can study intensively for a period and then demonstrate mastery through tests or projects. But character development is more like physical fitness. It requires ongoing practice and attention, and it can deteriorate if neglected. This understanding can help you maintain realistic expectations about your progress while staying committed to the path. When you find yourself reacting with anger instead of patience, or fear instead of courage, this isn't evidence that you're failing in your philosophical practice. It's simply information about where your practice needs attention. The Stoics wrote about how even advanced practitioners continued to struggle with difficult emotions and challenging situations throughout their lives. Marcus Aurelius filled his journal with reminders about basic principles, suggesting that even someone of his philosophical sophistication needed regular reinforcement of fundamental insights. The 48th technique is the practice of what we might call philosophical forgiveness, learning to release resentment and blame without condoning harmful behavior or abandoning appropriate boundaries. This is perhaps one of the most misunderstood aspects of Stoic practice, often confused with passive acceptance of mistreatment. True philosophical forgiveness begins with understanding that holding on to anger and resentment primarily hurts the person carrying these emotions. When you remain angry about something that happened in the past, you're essentially allowing that past event to continue influencing your present state of mind. This doesn't serve justice or prevent future harm, it simply prolongs your own suffering. But forgiveness doesn't require pretending that harmful actions were acceptable or that you should trust someone who is proven untrustworthy. You can release your anger while still maintaining appropriate boundaries. You can choose not to carry resentment while still protecting yourself from future harm. The Stoics understood that forgiveness is ultimately a gift you give yourself, a way of reclaiming your inner peace from the power of past events. It's based on the recognition that everyone acts according to their own understanding of what's best, even when their understanding is flawed or their actions cause harm. The 49th technique involves cultivating what we might call philosophical gratitude for difficulty, the ability to appreciate challenging experiences for their role in developing your character and deepening your wisdom. This is different from pretending that painful experiences are somehow good or desirable. It's about recognizing that they often serve important functions in your growth. Consider the metaphor of physical exercise. When you lift weights or run distances, you're deliberately creating stress and discomfort for your body. This stress isn't pleasant in the moment, but it serves the larger purpose of building strength and endurance. Similarly, life's difficulties often function as training for your philosophical muscles, opportunities to practice virtue under challenging conditions. This doesn't mean seeking out suffering or believing that more difficulty automatically leads to more growth. Some challenges are genuinely harmful and should be avoided or addressed when possible. But when facing unavoidable difficulties, this perspective can help you find meaning and purpose in the experience, rather than simply enduring it. Marcus Aurelius wrote about how obstacles become the path, how the very challenges that seem to block your progress can become opportunities to develop qualities you couldn't cultivate in easier circumstances. Patience grows through encounters with frustration. Courage develops through facing fears. Compassion deepens through understanding suffering. The 50th and final technique we'll explore is what the Stoics called the discipline of philosophical legacy. Living with awareness of how your choices and actions ripple outward to influence others and contribute to the larger human story. This isn't about seeking fame or recognition, but about understanding that your life has meaning beyond your personal satisfaction, and that your daily choices matter in ways you may never fully know. Every interaction you have with another person leaves some impression, however small. Every choice you make to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity, kindness rather than harshness, courage rather than fear, contributes to the overall quality of human experience. You're part of a vast web of influence that extends far beyond what you can see or measure. This awareness can provide both motivation and comfort during difficult times. When you're struggling with personal challenges, remembering that your response to those challenges might inspire or teach others can help you choose the higher path. When you feel that your individual actions don't matter in the face of large-scale problems, remembering that every significant change in human history began with individuals choosing to act according to their values can restore your sense of purpose. Seneca understood this deeply. writing letters to his friend Lucilius, partly because he knew that sharing his philosophical insights might benefit not just Lucilius but future readers who would encounter these ideas centuries later. He was planting seeds of wisdom that would grow long after his own life ended. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration tonight, having journeyed through 50 techniques that the ancient Stoics developed for building mental resilience and inner freedom, I want to return to the fundamental insight that underlies all of their practices. An unbreakable mind is not one that never experiences difficulty, but one that has learned to work skillfully with whatever arises. Like water that adapts to any container while maintaining its essential nature, or like a tree that bends in storms while keeping its roots firmly planted, the philosophical practitioner develops flexibility without losing their core values, responsiveness without losing their center, openness without losing their wisdom. The Stoics discovered that we have far more power over our inner state than we typically realize, and simultaneously far less control over external circumstances than we usually assume. This insight, fully integrated and consistently applied, can transform your relationship with everything from minor daily irritations to major life crises. But remember, these techniques are not meant to be implemented all at once or mastered quickly. They are invitations to a way of life, practices to be explored gradually and gently, wisdom to be absorbed slowly, like nutrients, into soil. Start with what resonates most deeply with your current situation and let your understanding grow naturally over time. The ancient philosophers who developed these insights lived through challenges that would test anyone's resilience. Wars, plagues, political upheavals, personal losses, physical hardships, social injustices. Yet they found ways to maintain their inner freedom, to act with virtue, to contribute meaningfully to their communities, and to find peace even in turbulent circumstances. Their wisdom wasn't theoretical, but practical, tested in the crucible of real human experience. They proved that it's possible to build minds that are unbreakable, not in the sense of being rigid or invulnerable, but in the sense of being able to bend without breaking, to feel deeply without being destroyed by those feelings, to care profoundly without being controlled by attachment to outcomes. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, you might reflect on this remarkable fact that wisdom, developed over 2,000 years ago, remains profoundly relevant for navigating the challenges of contemporary life. The specific circumstances we face may be different, but the fundamental human experiences of uncertainty, loss, conflict, and mortality remain unchanged. These Stoic techniques offer a path toward what the ancients called ataraxia, a state of calm equanimity that doesn't depend on external circumstances, not the absence of feeling, but the presence of wisdom, not the elimination of challenges, but the development of better responses to them. The unbreakable mind they envisioned is ultimately a free mind, one that can choose its responses rather than simply react to stimuli, one that can find meaning and purpose even in difficult circumstances, one that can remain open and loving even when life is painful or confusing. As you drift towards sleep, surrounded by these ancient insights and carried by the wisdom of those who walked this path before us, remember that every day offers new opportunities to practice these arts of living. Every challenge becomes a chance to apply these principles. Every interaction becomes a moment to choose virtue over convenience, wisdom over impulse, compassion over judgment. The path toward an unbreakable mind is itself a form of philosophical practice, requiring patience with yourself, forgiveness for your inevitable mistakes, and faith in your capacity to grow and learn. You don't need to be perfect to begin this journey. You just need to be willing to try, to experiment with these ancient techniques and see how they might serve your own quest for inner freedom. May these timeless teachings accompany you gently into rest, and may you wake tomorrow with renewed appreciation for the extraordinary opportunity of conscious existence. the profound gift of being alive and aware in a universe that has somehow arranged itself in such a way that matter can contemplate itself, that atoms can ponder ethics, that fleeting creatures can touch eternal truths. The Stoics believed that we are all temporary expressions of something larger and more enduring, brief candles that can choose to burn brightly or dimly during our short time. Tonight, as their wisdom settles softly around your thoughts like starlight, you join that ancient tradition of seekers who understood that true strength comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from cultivating the kind of inner freedom that no external force can touch. Sweet dreams, and may the wisdom of ages whisper gently through your rest, preparing you for whatever tomorrow may hold, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you carry within yourself everything necessary to meet it with grace, courage, and compassion. In the morning light, these ancient principles will be waiting patiently to guide your unbreakable mind, steps along the path to one mindful choice at a time. The 51st technique involves what we might call the art of philosophical simplicity, learning to distinguish between what is truly necessary and what is merely habitual or socially expected. The Stoics understood that much of our mental agitation comes not from genuine needs, but from accumulated desires and obligations that we've never consciously examined. Think about the layers of complexity that have built up in your daily life. How many of your possessions do you actually use or appreciate? How many of your commitments truly align with your deepest values? How many of your worries concern things that won't matter in 5 years or even 5 months? Seneca, despite his wealth and social position, regularly practiced what he called voluntary poverty, temporarily giving up luxuries to remind himself that his happiness didn't depend on them. He understood that simplicity isn't about deprivation, but about clarity, about removing the unnecessary so that the essential can shine through more brightly. This doesn't mean abandoning all comforts or responsibilities, but rather approaching them more consciously. When you acquire something new, you might ask whether it adds genuine value to your life or simply creates more complexity. When you take on a new commitment, you might consider whether it serves your growth in wisdom and virtue or merely fills time. The practice of philosophical simplicity creates space, both external and internal. With fewer possessions demanding your attention and fewer obligations fragmenting your energy, you have more capacity for the relationships and activities that truly nourish your soul. Your mind becomes less cluttered with trivial decisions and more available for meaningful reflection. The 50-second technique is the cultivation of what the Stoics called the discipline of philosophical attention, learning to direct your mental energy consciously rather than allowing it to be scattered by whatever happens to catch your notice. In our age of constant distraction, this ancient practice feels particularly relevant and challenging. Consider how often your attention moves throughout a single day. You start reading something interesting, then remember an email you need to send, which reminds you of a conversation you had yesterday, which triggers worry about a meeting next week. Before you know it, your mind has wandered through a dozen different concerns without fully engaging with any of them. The Stoics understood that attention is one of your most precious resources, perhaps the most precious. How you use your attention determines the quality of your experience and the direction of your growth. When you allow it to be hijacked by every passing thought or external stimulus, you lose the capacity for deep engagement and meaningful progress. Marcus Aurelius practiced exercises in focused attention, deliberately choosing where to direct his mental energy rather than simply reacting to whatever demanded it. He would set aside time for specific types of thinking, philosophical reflection in the morning, practical planning when needed, but always with conscious intention rather than random drift. You might experiment with this yourself. When you notice your mind wandering during a conversation, gently bring your attention back to the person speaking. When you catch yourself worrying about multiple things simultaneously, choose one concern to address fully before moving to others. When you're engaged in any activity, periodically ask yourself whether your attention is where you want it to be. The 53rd technique involves developing what we might call philosophical equanimity toward change, learning to flow with life's natural rhythms rather than exhausting yourself by trying to keep everything permanently the same. The Stoics recognized that change is the fundamental nature of existence and that resistance to this reality creates unnecessary suffering. Think about the changes you've experienced in your own life. Relationships have begun and ended. Living situations have shifted. Your body has aged and will continue aging. Your interests and priorities have evolved. Your understanding of yourself and the world has deepened and transformed. None of these changes were optional, yet many of them have contributed to your growth and wisdom. The difficulty arises not from change itself, but from our attachment to specific states of affairs. We want the people we love to remain exactly as they are. We want our health and energy to stay constant. We want our comfortable routines to continue indefinitely. But this desire for permanence in an impermanent world creates a constant undercurrent of anxiety and disappointment. Epictetus taught his students to practice what he called the discipline of desire, learning to want what happens rather than demanding that what they want must happen. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on goals, but rather holding those goals lightly while accepting whatever actually unfolds. When change arrives in your life, whether welcomed or unwelcome, you can ask yourself how you might work with this new reality rather than against it. What opportunities might this change create that weren't visible before? How might this transition serve your development in ways you couldn't have planned? What qualities might you need to cultivate to navigate this new terrain with grace? The 54th technique is the practice of what the Stoics called philosophical courage in relationships, the willingness to be vulnerable and authentic with others while maintaining your own center and boundaries. This involves finding the balance between openness and self-protection, between caring deeply and holding lightly. Many of us struggle with this balance in our connections with others. Either we become so open that we lose ourselves in trying to please or fix other people, or we become so protective that we miss opportunities for genuine intimacy and mutual support. The Stoics sought a middle path that preserved both personal integrity and relational depth. This means learning to speak truthfully about your thoughts and feelings without demanding that others respond in specific ways. It means offering support and care without taking responsibility for other people's choices and emotions. It means staying present during difficult conversations without becoming defensive or attacking about how even difficult people are fellow when tensions arise. Marcus Aurelius wrote travelers struggling with their own fears and limitations. This perspective allowed him to maintain compassion without compromising his principles, to stay engaged without becoming emotionally reactive, to lead with strength while remaining genuinely human. You might practice this by noticing your patterns in relationships. Do you tend to withdraw when conflicts arise, or do you become aggressive? Do you sacrifice your own needs to avoid disappointing others, or do you insist that relationships conform to your preferences? Philosophical courage in relationships means finding ways to show up authentically while allowing others the same freedom. The 55th technique involves cultivating what we might call the discipline of philosophical work, approaching your daily tasks and responsibilities as opportunities for practicing virtue rather than merely as obligations to complete or obstacles to endure. The Stoics understood that any work, however humble, could become a vehicle for developing character and contributing to the common good. Whether you spend your days caring for children, managing spreadsheets, fixing mechanical problems, or teaching students, you can approach these activities as spiritual practice. The question isn't whether your work is inherently meaningful, but whether you can bring meaning to whatever work you do through the quality of attention and intention you apply. This doesn't mean pretending to love jobs that genuinely don't suit you, or accepting unfair treatment from employers. Sometimes wisdom requires making changes in your work situation. But even while planning or pursuing such changes, you can practice approaching your current responsibilities with integrity and care. When you're tempted to rush through tasks carelessly, you might see this as an opportunity to practice patience and thoroughness. When you encounter difficult colleagues or customers, this becomes a chance to develop compassion and skillful communication. When you feel bored or frustrated with our routine duties, you can explore how to bring creativity and mindfulness to familiar activities. Seneca wrote about how the wise person finds satisfaction in doing any job well, regardless of its social status or external rewards. This isn't about accepting exploitation or giving up on ambitions, but about finding dignity and purpose in whatever circumstances you currently face while working thoughtfully toward better ones. The 56th technique is the cultivation of what the Stoics called philosophical humility in the face of mystery, accepting that there are many aspects of existence that you will never fully understand while remaining curious and open to learning. This involves finding peace with uncertainty rather than demanding complete explanations for everything you encounter. We live in an age that promises answers to every question, solutions to every problem, explanations for every mystery. Yet the deepest questions about existence, consciousness, love, meaning, and death remain as mysterious as they've ever been. The Stoics found wisdom in acknowledging these limits while continuing to explore what could be understood. This philosophical humility applies to understanding other people as well. You can develop genuine empathy and insight into human nature without claiming to know exactly why someone acts as they do or what they're truly feeling. You can offer support and guidance without pretending to have all the answers. You can engage in meaningful conversations about complex topics without needing to win arguments or prove your superiority. Marcus Aurelius regularly expressed wonder at the mystery of consciousness itself. The remarkable fact that matter has somehow organized itself in such a way that it can contemplate its own existence. Rather than finding this uncertainty disturbing, he found it humbling and awe-inspiring, a reminder of how much remains beyond human comprehension. When you encounter situations that don't make sense to you, when people behave in ways you can't understand, when life presents challenges that seem to have no clear purpose or solution, you can practice holding these mysteries lightly. Not everything needs to be figured out immediately. Some questions are meant to be lived with rather than answered quickly. The 57th technique involves developing what we might call the art of philosophical rest, learning to truly relax and restore yourself without guilt about productivity or anxiety about what you should be accomplishing. The Stoics understood that sustainable wisdom requires periods of genuine renewal, times when you step back from striving and allow yourself simply to exist. In our achievement-oriented culture, rest often feels like laziness or waste of time. We fill our leisure hours with activities that are supposed to be relaxing, but actually require effort and attention. We check emails during vacations, worry about work during weekends, and feel guilty when we're not actively improving ourselves or solving problems. But true rest isn't just physical inactivity, it's mental and emotional restoration. It's allowing your mind to wander without agenda, letting your body relax without pressure to accomplish anything, spending time in activities that restore your sense of wonder and connection rather than drain your energy or add to your responsibilities. This kind of rest actually supports your philosophical practice because it prevents the exhaustion and resentment that can develop when you're constantly pushing yourself. When you're truly rested, you have more resources for responding to challenges with wisdom rather than reactivity, more patience for difficult people and situations, more capacity for joy and gratitude. The Stoics practiced what they called otium, a form of leisure that wasn't empty time-filling, but rather space for reflection, contemplation, and the cultivation of wisdom. They understood that stepping back from active engagement periodically allows you to return to it with greater clarity and purpose. The 58th technique is the practice of what we might call philosophical mentorship, both seeking guidance from those who are further along the path of wisdom and offering support to those who are just beginning their own journey of growth. The Stoics understood that wisdom develops through community and conversation, not just individual effort. This doesn't necessarily mean finding formal teachers or students, though those relationships can certainly be valuable. It means remaining open to learning from anyone who demonstrates wisdom in their approach to life's challenges, regardless of their age, education, or social position. Sometimes the person who teaches you patience is a child. Sometimes the one who models courage is someone facing difficulties you've never experienced. Similarly, you can offer guidance and support to others without claiming to be an expert or having achieved perfect wisdom yourself. Often the most helpful thing you can share is simply your own honest experience of trying to live according to philosophical principles, including your mistakes and ongoing struggles, as well as your insights and successes. Seneca's letters to Lucilius provide a beautiful example of philosophical friendship, two people supporting each other's growth through honest sharing of their experiences and insights. They didn't pretend to have mastered all the principles they discussed, but they helped each other stay committed to the path of wisdom through encouragement, challenge, and mutual accountability. When you encounter someone who seems to be struggling with challenges you've faced, you might ask yourself how you could offer support in a way that respects their autonomy and dignity. When you meet who you admire, you might consider how someone who demonstrates qualities you could learn from their example without comparing yourself unfavorably or trying to imitate them exactly. The 59th technique involves cultivating what the Stoics called the discipline of philosophical gratitude for ordinary moments, learning to appreciate the simple experiences that make up most of daily life, rather than only feeling thankful when something especially good happens. This practice can transform your relationship with routine activities and common experiences. Most of our lives consist not of dramatic events, but of ordinary moments: waking up in the morning, preparing food, having conversations, walking from one place to another, lying down to sleep at night. These activities are so familiar that we often barely notice them, taking them for granted while waiting for more interesting or significant experiences. But the Stoics found profound meaning and beauty in these simple activities when approached with the right attention. The taste of water when you're thirsty, the warmth of sunlight through a window, the comfort of clean clothes, the satisfaction of completing a small task, the pleasure of a friend's laughter. These are gifts that surround you constantly if you develop the eyes to see them. This isn't about forcing false positivity or pretending that difficult circumstances are wonderful. It's about recognizing that even in challenging times, there are usually small graces present that can provide comfort and perspective. The ability to breathe without effort, the fact that you have a place to sleep, the existence of people who care about your well-being. These basic gifts often continue even when other aspects of life are difficult. You might practice this by periodically pausing during routine activities to really notice what you're experiencing. Feel the temperature of the air on your skin. Taste your food slowly. Listen to the sounds around you. Appreciate the miracle that your body performs thousands of complex functions without your conscious direction. The 60th and final technique we'll explore tonight is what the Stoics called the discipline of philosophical legacy, living with awareness that your choices and example influence others in ways you may never fully know, and that your life contributes to the larger human story of growth toward wisdom and virtue. This isn't about seeking recognition or trying to be remembered after you die, but about understanding that every action you take, every choice you make, every response you give to life's challenges ripples outward in ways both visible and invisible. Your commitment to growth and virtue doesn't just benefit you, it contributes to the overall quality of human experience. When you choose patience instead of anger, you make it slightly easier for others to remain calm. When you respond to criticism with equanimity rather than defensiveness, you model a way of receiving feedback that others might learn from. When you act with integrity, even when no one is watching, you strengthen the fabric of trust and honor that makes civilized life possible. This awareness can provide both motivation and comfort during difficult times. When you're struggling with personal challenges, remembering that your response to those challenges might inspire others can help you choose the wiser path. When you feel that your individual efforts don't matter in the face of large-scale problems, remembering that every significant positive change in human history began with individuals choosing to act according to their highest values can restore your sense of purpose. The ancient Stoics wrote and taught partly because they understood that sharing wisdom multiplies its impact. Seneca's letters, Marcus Aurelius's meditations, Epictetus's teachings, these weren't just personal exercises, but gifts to future generations, seeds of wisdom planted for people they would never meet. Tonight, as we reach the end of our gentle exploration of 60 techniques for building an unbreakable mind, remember that you too are planting seeds through your daily choices and responses. Every moment of wisdom you embody, every act of virtue you perform, every instance of choosing growth over stagnation becomes part of your legacy to the world. The Stoics discovered that true strength lies not in controlling circumstances, but in choosing wise responses to whatever circumstances arise. They learned that peace comes not from having your preferences met, but from accepting what cannot be changed while acting skillfully on what can be influenced. They found that meaning emerges not from avoiding difficulty, but from using challenges as opportunities to develop character and deepen understanding. As you settle into sleep tonight, surrounded by these ancient insights that have guided thoughtful people through countless generations of human experience, remember that developing an unbreakable mind is not about becoming invulnerable to life's inevitable sorrows and setbacks. It's about learning to bend without breaking, to feel without being overwhelmed, to care without being controlled by outcomes. Like water that finds its way around obstacles while maintaining its essential nature, or like trees that sway in storms while keeping their roots firmly planted, the philosophical practitioner develops flexibility without losing core principles, responsiveness without losing inner stability, openness without losing wisdom. The path towards such resilience is itself a practice requiring patience with your own imperfections, compassion for your inevitable mistakes, and faith in your capacity to grow throughout your lifetime. Each day offers fresh opportunities to apply these ancient principles, to choose wisdom over reactivity, virtue over convenience, growth over comfort. May these timeless teachings accompany you gently into rest, and may you wake tomorrow with renewed appreciation for the remarkable gift of conscious existence and the profound opportunity to contribute your own unique verse to the ongoing human story of learning to live with greater wisdom, courage, and compassion. The Stoics believed that philosophy is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a way of life, a daily practice of choosing responses that reflect our highest understanding rather than our immediate impulses. Tonight, as their wisdom settles softly around your thoughts like evening stillness, you join that ancient tradition of seekers who understood that true freedom comes from within. Sweet dreams, and may the wisdom of ages whisper gently through your rest, preparing you for whatever tomorrow may bring, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you carry within yourself everything necessary to meet it with grace. In the morning light, these philosophical principles will be waiting patiently to guide your steps along the path toward an unbreakable mind, one mindful choice at a time. Thank you for joining me on this gentle journey through the timeless wisdom of the Stoics tonight. We've explored 60 techniques that have guided thoughtful souls for over 2 millennia, practices that can help you build not a rigid, unfeeling mind, but one that flows like water around life's obstacles while never losing its essential nature. Remember, you don't need to master all of these at once. Choose one or two that speak to your heart, practice them with patience, and let your understanding deepen naturally. The ancient philosophers themselves were lifelong students, constantly returning to these fundamental truths. As you drift into peaceful sleep, carry with you this simple knowing: you already possess everything needed to meet tomorrow with wisdom and grace. Your mind, like water, can learn to bend without breaking, to flow around difficulties while maintaining its pure essence. Sweet dreams, dear listener, and may these ancient teachings whisper softly through your rest.